Penalty is the law in some 38 states across the country, and in New York, courts have struck it down, and lawmakers are debating whether to bring it back. They're facing opposition from an unlikely source, the former warden of one of the nation's famous prisons, Sing Sing. Just a warning, there is some. Here's HInojosa.
He once had the close-cropped hair and steely gaze of a 1950s tough guy, and he had the job to back it up. Stephen Dalsheim, in charge of one of America's most notorious prisons, Sing Sing, the legendary death house where more than 600 men and women were executed.
I'm not a big tough guy. I don't yell and shout. I don't use curse words. I just don't fit the model. But I ran the prisons.
He oversaw many of America's worst criminals, its gangsters and pedophiles and murderers. But Dalsheim says he was troubled by the executions. He said nothing back then, even when crowds protested the electric Ethel and...
They put these two people in the chair, they strap them, somebody turns on the electricity, and they kill them. And if you went into the death house, it looks in there, and instead of the altar is the chair.
He watched over his prisoners like a hawk. But the years passed and he retired. Now at 77, this former Sing Sing warden is a dove who can no longer be quiet.
I'm here today to ask you not to bring back the death penalty. The criminal justice system is not perfect. Mistakes are made. There are innocent people in prison. There have been innocent people on death row, and even in New York State, innocent people have been executed.
Dalsheim was nervous as he testified recently before a New York State legislative committee. It is time, he says, to face history.
The death penalty was administered unfairly. Both geography and racism profoundly influence who will be executed by the state.
Dalsheim started at Sing Sing in 1953 as a social worker counseling brutal criminals on how to better themselves. Then one day he recommended a black inmate for a job as a painter.
This deputy superintendent who was in charge of it said to the other man there on the committee, "Did you ever see a nigger who could paint?" "Never did. Put him in the kitchen."
He was so shocked, ready to quit. He called a friend.
And she says, "Don't quit. They need you there." But I didn't know what to do. But I stayed. I learned. And I didn't know there were black and white jobs.
Dalsheim did stay and was named warden in 1977. He hoped to make an inhuman prison system just a little bit more humane. But one day he saw the medical notes about the executions and became even more tormented.
People who worked with the guy, who knew him, puts him in there, straps him, and they shoot him with electricity. He shakes, smoke comes out of him, and he's dead. And if the doctor examines, if he's not dead, they give him another blast.
One inmate whose record he reviewed was Charles Spurna, executed in 1939 for killing a police officer. Spurna's co-conspirator, Salvador Gotti, later said Spurna was not involved. Scott Christensen reviewed the same case for his book Condemned, and he agrees with Dalsheim's conclusion.
Most of the people who were executed in these days would not have been executed today because they did not have a lawyer present when they were questioned. They were beaten. Things were done to them to get them to confess to their crime.
Some legislators were impressed by Dalsheim's testimony, but he didn't change many minds.
He's seen things that I haven't seen. I give tremendous weight to his testimony. I just think that at the end of the day, for the mass murderers, for the cop killers, society really doesn't have any other alternative.
But Dalsheim insists there are alternatives. That a state, any state, puts people to death, he says, is just wrong.
I just think it's terrible that the government, to solve some problems, kills people. It's just, I can't understand it.
What a journey he has traveled over the years.